watching the conductor do what he does, leading an orchestra, and made me realize, like, wait a second, he kind of has the same job than I have. They gave the chorus and the audience context of the piece, what it meant to the composer, to really make the performance really understand what the intention of the composer was. So he talked about the vision. We cannot just assume as leaders that just because we put the vision on the wall or on a piece of paper, that we all understand the same. We cannot not talk about it. And what happened last night on stage, after he had talked about it, it was a complete different performance. And it was so more powerful.
Welcome to the Unconventional Leadership Podcast, where we help you unlock your potential as a leader. Hey, can I ask you a favor? Can you please hit subscribe or follow on any platform that you're listening or watching this episode? Our goal is to connect with you, to bring additional value to you, to bring additional topics to you, and we can do that more effectively if you hit subscribe or follow. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for joining this week's episode of the Unconventional Leadership Podcast. For those who have been longtime 8-year listeners, you're in for quite a treat for one of our amazing guests to be back in the studio with us. Also, it'd be, without me saying, a great friend, a great advisor, a business partner. I have today Daniel Wachter. Daniel, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back, Mike.
So I go back all the way. So we did episode 9, 119, 152, 156, 173, 177, 181. And this, I believe, is going to be episode 248 in the placement here. So again, what an amazing journey we were on together as we were making leadership tangible in all of those episodes, Daniel.
Exactly. And I think to remember there was a little global pandemic in between those days and conversation today. So a few things have changed since then too. So I really look forward to the conversation, Mike.
Just a few. And I remember the very first discussion you started framing up this amazing vision, comparing the hard work and dedication of leadership to the hard work and dedication of performing and musical arts. And at that time, you were the president of an incredible privately held packaging company that led you to a journey of you and I meeting, and then led to a journey of you relocating to support and help grow another packaging company, a packaging technology business. And now you're the CEO of the Colorado Symphony Association and Orchestra. So walk us through a little bit of the journey that put you from these podcast conversations to a vision to joining and becoming a CEO of an amazing symphony.
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, by trade, I'm a business guy, and as you mentioned, I came to Cincinnati, Ohio, in 2011 with my family to run the North American business of a German family-owned packaging company. And while doing that, I fell in love with classical music, with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, and it kind of became my church. So I went there every weekend. I got my soul massaged, enjoyed the music, and one night indeed had my own big personal epiphany watching the conductor do what he does, leading an orchestra, and made me realize, like, wait a second, he kind of has the same job than I have. I'm a president of the company. I don't sell, I don't produce, I don't collect payables. What is it actually that I'm doing? What is it actually that I'm supposed to do? The conductor does not play an instrument, though there is a role that the conductor has to play. So anyway, that thought, that epiphany kind of carried me a little away that night and made me find so many analogies between watching a leader lead an orchestra and me leading an organization, and what that can teach and tell me. So I got out of this performance completely fired up about this analogy until I found, well, I'm not the first one who sees that analogy. So I started to study that a little bit. And by studying it a little bit, by keeping on going to concerts, I kind of think I really became a better leader. And I worked with this analogy in my own leadership work with my teams and my own coachings, and found it as an incredible, powerful way to get inspired as a business leader and what we can learn from a conductor leading an orchestra. So that's kind of the sole hobby, to what I started to learn as a business leader from symphony music. I got the chance to join the board of directors of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra in 2018. So what started as a soul hobby became an intellectual hobby. Through that global pandemic, which was a very stressful time, for all of us. But for the symphony, it meant that the business was kind of dead from one day to another because we could not perform music anymore. So I was on the board of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra through the pandemic. I decided for a career change. I was offered to join a business in Colorado Springs as a shareholder and chief commercial officer with the intention to become CEO. That combined with our love for Colorado and the outdoors and that little pandemic was a catalyst for a change and a move to Colorado Springs in 2020 in the middle of lockdown. A little bit crazy. Our families in Germany all said, "What are you guys doing? It's a global pandemic and you do what? You move to the other side of the country kind of." So, but anyway, it was a change catalyst for us to change. I joined that business. My love for the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra continued. I stayed on the board, but with my desire of needing music to keep me sane, to keep my soul massage, to keep my church, I started to go to the Colorado Symphony in Denver and got introduced to people. And me being me, cannot not to get to know people. I started to engage in Denver the way I did in Cincinnati before until I realized that with the offer to join their board, I wanted to join that board because I wanted to make an impact in the community and in the place where I live. So that triggered a change for me to leave the board in Cincinnati to join the board in Colorado, at Colorado Symphony in Denver. And becoming friends with the future board chair, he offered me to become the vice chair in 2024. And actually, giving him credit, he was the person who ideated and encouraged to think about a major career shift of leaving the for-profit world to lead the Colorado Symphony, to lead a symphony business. And that's the big career change I have just made 11 months ago, April 1 in 2025.
That's awesome. What an amazing journey. And take me back when you mentioned earlier, and congratulations on all this continued success and the opportunity to see the heart work and the vocational and the passion you have for the arts. I can only imagine the impact that you're going to have with the team that you're leading at the Colorado Symphony. But take me back to the moment where you mentioned as you were exploring what the conductor was doing on stage, and that started showing up in your leadership and how you were leading your team and how you were communicating with your team, because there is a bit of a silence in the leadership and approach, like the intentionality of a conductor. You know, the conductor's leading executives who are experts at their space that know more than the conductor does about their craft. He or she happens to be the kind of the leader, the maestro of it all. But how did you relate that to the CEO role, and how did that show up leading your team directly?
I mean, like I said, Mike, it related to me in a way that I realized that I don't sell, I don't produce, I don't ship, I don't collect receivables, though I have a role to play. And when I then started to think about the role of the conductor, having the score, seeing all the music, standing in front of an orchestra, but not making any sound, though having to really orchestrate all those 80 musicians to play music together, to talk about the vision of the piece. I mean, technically you could say all the ingredients is there, this person is not needed because they can play the music themselves, they can synchronize themselves, though there is really an impact. And this to me translated so much to the business reality I had at that time, scaling and turning around a business, talking about vision of the business, talking about the strategy of the business, talking about the business plan, like the score being the business plan and the different functions having their part of the overall plan, and they can perform their part, but it needs to be orchestrated. It needs to be synchronized. I need to make sure that I, as a business leader, show the total picture, talk about the vision. I cannot just assume that they're all aligned about it. We need to have time to listen to each other. We need to have time to get aligned to each other. So I found those incredible, powerful analogies, not only in terms of getting aligned around a plan, but also what other leadership aspects are there that we can learn in terms of how important it is to listen to each other, for example, which we at times fail to do in business because it's so hectic, and we are leading by directing instead of leading by listening, leading by enabling, leading by empowering. Sometimes as leaders, we fall into the trap that we think that we should play the music. Well, at times we probably need to, but not really if we think about it. We need to enable, empower, encourage, enhance people to perform their role. So anyway, an incredible, powerful analogy that inspired my own leadership work, that inspired on how I coached and led some of my leaders to make them understand. And really, I used that analogy in some of our meetings to make them understand what I mean in terms of what it means for us to lead together as a team and what it should mean for them to lead their teams.
Wow. And one of the guests that you had on in the episodes that I referenced earlier is an individual who built and designed a leadership development workshop. And you have now found leaders from around the world who do that. But I believe you found the research of him like leveraging getting patrons on stage with the orchestra as a leadership class to drive home those leadership traits that we can take from the experience of what's on stage. Can you share a little bit about that journey? And because I believe you came across maybe his book, was it, or one of his classes?
Yes, there is actually someone who wrote a book about this analogy, Roger Nierenberg. So I found him and started to talk to him. But I found another gentleman in Germany, Raphael van Honsbruch, who actually takes this analogy as well and delivers it as a leadership workshop. And beyond my own learnings and my own work of using this analogy with my own leadership teams, I really had the idea about, I want to deliver such kind of a workshop and to be of value to the business community. Again, those plans got a little bit disrupted by that global pandemic. With my move to Colorado and joining the Colorado Symphony's board here in Denver, I found an incredibly innovative, open-minded environment in which, when I told them about, my own epiphanies and what I've learned, and then I found people who can deliver something like this as a leadership workshop, they looked at me to say, "So you can do that?" They say, "Well, I can't, but I know people who do." And they said, "Hey, would you be up for doing that together with the Colorado Symphony?" And again, the answer was a no-brainer. So I collaborated with Raphael. We delivered this workshop, Mike, that you have been part of in 2024. We did that the first time with the Colorado Symphony in 2024. We did it the second time last year. We'll do it again this upcoming April. And just last night, we delivered this kind of workshop, not as an orchestra version, but as a chorus version. So we can do it in both ways, with the orchestra and with the chorus. So this being said, from a symphony perspective, I found this epiphany and the opportunity to be of value to the business community an incredible way to make impact in the business community that we're a part of. So as a Colorado Symphony here in Denver, in Colorado, obviously, we're a curator of classical music. We perform symphonic arrangement of non-classical music. And I really want to increase our impact to different parts of the community. And this kind of leadership epiphany, leadership training, which is something you cannot buy, and it doesn't help if you read it by the book. It is an immersive experience. To do that, and I've just seen it last night again, is incredibly impactful. Because we invite business leaders on stage into our house. They were seated inside the orchestra, or last night they were seated inside the chorus, and they experience from that inside on stage the leadership workshop of the conductor with the orchestra, with the chorus firsthand. And we talk about that experience. And that's a very powerful immersive experience that really gives value to the business community. We turn our resource into a training resource to provide them an immersive experience that they cannot buy elsewhere. And at the same time, I like the idea that we get them on the hook for music and to come back and to experience performances.
That's right. Well, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So think about the opportunity to sit alongside of experts at their craft and be with them as they're experiencing leading through a score, leading through music real time, playing music while you're implanted into their stage, not the audience, right? So it's literally those folks who flew out from Cincinnati, who joined the first one in 2024, like the feedback was like, nowhere in the world could you experience this unless you were right here on stage with the Colorado Symphony. Your high potential leaders and executives need more. They need someone who will come alongside of them to help them unlock what is holding them back and reach their fullest potential. Our executive coaching matches your leaders with the right coach through our proprietary coach matching process. We focus on real growth with clear goals, frequent check-ins, and measurable results that you see and experience. Whether it's a 6-month engagement or ongoing support, we help your leaders become the executives that they desire and that your organization needs. Visit talentmagnet.com to start the conversation today. What do you believe are the top 3 takeaways of leadership? Maybe there's 5, but what are at least the top 3 that you feel that people are experiencing when they show up in April in 2026 with you, or when they show up at the next experience with the orchestra?
Yeah, happy to share that because it just comes fresh from last night and the Conducting Business Leadership Workshop with the chorus from last night. I think you already answered the first question. It is an experience. There is a difference if you read a book or if you watch a video. It is an immersive experience. And what people told me last night is the music obviously connects emotionally, and it opens very different ways of how people receive information and process. We made people cry last night. They got emotional, and it's a very, very different learning experience. So I think that's one of the very unique things, that it is an experience. Second, it is an experience shared with many others. So there's a lot of conversation and observation going and joint processing in terms of what people have observed, not only the participants, but also the musicians. So they get the chance of both perspectives, not only what they and the participants have experienced, but they also hear how the musicians experience the leadership work of the conductor. So it happens all in real time. And in that respect, and I think the third, which is now multifold, there are so many aspects that we kind of tend to forget. So last night, for example, the conductor warmed up the chorus. He asked the question, how many of us take the time before a meeting to warm up? Not only the voice, but also warm up in terms of, are we aligned on what we want to get accomplished before we just jump into the work? There are aspects about the importance of listening, the importance of visual contact. So there's so many aspects in terms of experience, of one being shared, to make it tangible, to make it experienceable, to process it together in real time, on stage, being present, and to get inspired for so many aspects of leadership that are 100% transferable from stage into our day jobs next day. I'm so convinced that the little booklets of those over 50 participants from last night sit on their desk today, and they think of the workshop experience last night many times and talk to their colleagues about it because it was tangible and it was experienceable.
Yeah. And I love the idea of like, okay, how much do we prepare for the performance that we're about to do for those that we serve, for the products we create, for the services that we generate, for stepping on, stage in front of the team? How much do we think about the impact of how we want our notes to feel and to connect with those that we're speaking? So I took my experience in 2024 was so much of it was like going from a visionary to really thinking through, how do your messages connect? Showing people, here's the work you do, and here's the impact of how it shows up in an overall orchestra. Because when you're a performer, when you're in the performance space, you feel how it shows up. You feel the energy from the conductor. You feel the energy from the other musicians, which are your other peers and colleagues, right?
Yeah.
I remember also Raphael's feedback to one particular musician. He was trying to get the musician to play a different note, and how hard it was for that musician to crack into that space, because this is what they trained for. So it's like that musician couldn't get out of step because they trained their entire lives to never be out of step. And it was a great example of like, how much does your team train to achieve things with excellence? Because it's not just going to show up. You have to work at this. You train for years, and which is why very rarely on a stage at the level that you lead will you ever hear a note played inaccurately, because they practice and train for millions of hours or tens of thousands of hours to get those notes correct.
And still, Mike, they all aspire to get to the limits and to take some risks. And we all know what can happen if you take risks. It can succeed, and at times it does not succeed. And one thing I want to highlight, because you just mentioned something very important that resonated so incredibly well last night. You talked about the visionary part. It was wonderful to see the difference between a performance that started without a conversation about the meaning of the piece, and they performed it incredibly well. And what then Hal, the conductor and the coach yesterday did, they gave the chorus and the audience context of the piece, what it meant to the composer, what the composer wanted to express, to really make the performance really understand, other than the music that they see in front of them, what the intention of the composer was. And then he conducted it. So he talked about the vision. We cannot just assume as leaders that just because we put the vision on the wall or on a piece of paper, that we all understand the same. We cannot not talk about it. And what happened last night on stage, after he had talked about it, it was a complete different performance. And it was so more powerful, because it's not all just on paper in the music. So there's a visionary part, Mike, and then there is the other side of the spectrum that was coming out of this workshop also so well, that while we have to be visionary as leaders and talk about the vision and the meaning and the purpose to really get mentally aligned before we get to perform, we need to be very specific. So specific not only in time, but also specific in the expression, specific in the leadership work. So it's the full bandwidth that a lot of leaders became aware of, that we need to cover the full bandwidth of being visionary and being very specific.
That's incredible. And one of the areas, I think that's also the difference of managing instead of choosing to conduct and lead and set the vision, right? Because you can't tell them what to do when you're up on stage. But I have seen conductors who will stop and practice and say, let me tell you the emotion that should feel.
Yes.
Right? They're not telling them what note to play, but they're telling them how it should feel and how it should be played, not the specific exactly what to do.
Exactly. And again, there's different leadership styles and good leadership and also not so good leadership in business as well as in the arts on stage. And if I pick micromanagement, for example, I mean, maybe you remember, Mike, from the workshop that Raphael demonstrated what it means if he as a conductor micromanages a musician in terms of him or her performing their instrument and how they play and how well that micromanagement goes and not. And the same applies to business. So again, another very tangible analogy there of where and how I got inspired personally, and where I'm extremely happy that we can deliver this inspiration as an immersive experience to the business community here in Denver and Colorado with an orchestra workshop, with a chorus workshop, which we have done last night for the very, very first time. And I can tell we'll do that again. Awesome. And I've even developed or co-developed a jazz-inspired workshop with a jazz drummer I'm friends with. He's in New York, where leaders can learn from the interaction of a jazz trio and what that means for leadership in terms of inspiration, innovation, in terms of improvisation, agility, and so on. So the arts are incredibly inspiring, and making that connection to be of impact to the business community is incredibly fulfilling, especially as I come from the business community and found that inspiration myself. And now doing it the other way around to inspire the business community here and in Colorado.
That's so good. So good. Daniel, let's talk a little bit further about your why. So one of the things that you shared with me as we were prepping for this episode was the joy we gift to people when they come impacts the families, the patrons, and the caregivers. And I know you're doing some amazing work that you're also exploring. You're getting creative of where else music and art can have impact, specifically in the healthcare industry. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that work and research and implementation that you all are exploring?
Oh, absolutely. So let me start again with the vision, and then I get specific. So let me cover the full spectrum. As the Colorado Symphony, we want to inspire and unite humanity through live symphonic music. So there is the aspect of what I call my soul massage, so that we give people joy, we give people space and time to grieve, to connect to other as humans. So that's kind of what we want to do as an arts form. And that inspires, and it inspires in many ways. So we just talked about how we as an art form, how a conductor, the interaction with the orchestra, with the chorus, can inspire business leaders to become better leaders. And another inspiration, to get very specific, is there is probably, according to our own music director who was quoted on that, no better example of human collaboration than an orchestra to really unify 80, 100, 120 people in one voice at the same time. It's an incredibly collaborative model that people can explore and observe the leadership work, but also the collaboration. And that collaboration got recently really used as a role model to show collaboration in healthcare. So CU Anschutz, who is a partner here of us in Denver and Colorado, picked the collaborative model of the Colorado Symphony in an incredibly powerful commercial to explain why collaboration is the game changer in healthcare as well. So it inspired healthcare in terms of collaboration, and our story of collaboration on stage helps to tell their collaborative story in healthcare. And there are more specific ways of impact of our arts form beyond the joy that we can have in healthcare. And actually, in full transparency, I did not invent that. I got inspired by the Montreal Symphony, where their CEO found ways of making impact as a symphony into healthcare, to the point that doctors prescribe tickets to the symphony as part of the treatment. And there is solid data that shows the impact of our art form for mental health, even for physical health, what it does to blood pressure, what it does to heartbeat. And our collaboration with CU Anschutz, where we inspired to tell our collaborative story to the collaboration in healthcare, gets now extended and expanded in terms of how we can more directly make a positive impact to healthcare, working with the healthcare providers here in Denver and in Colorado.
That's so good. Well, we're going to play a video for all of you watching to recap from that partnership and show you just a little bit of the emotion that this can accomplish when you bring music and healthcare and patient care together.
In the quiet moments, when you're alone, your dreams can feel out of reach, even impossible. But what if your dream was our dream? What if we never dreamed alone? At CU Anschutz, we're turning dreams into life-changing discoveries together. Because this is where dreams live.
So, Daniel, one of the other things that you have talked about over the years is freedom of action, and how that freedom of action provided into your leadership team We spent, I think, a couple of episodes talking about it in the past. Can you unpack that a little bit in terms of building trust with people whose identity is deeply tied to their craft and still yet provide them freedom of action to explore and to be creative in that craft?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started with that epiphany I had in Cincinnati in 2016, 17, when I asked myself while I was president of that packaging company, what's my role? And obviously it started with the score or the business plan or the vision of the business, that one of my key roles is to make sure that my leadership team and the entire organization, at that time about 250, 300 people across the United States and Canada, that we are aligned on the purpose, on what we want to get accomplished, what we represent, what we stand for, what we do. Because I depended, and even today in a different organization, a very different business, I depend on my leaders to take so many decisions every single day. Their staff need to take so many decisions every single day. And the alignment starts on purpose, on values, on vision, on mission, on strategy, or if I use musical term, that we agree on what music do we play. And that as the business conductor, talk about my interpretation of the score, of the music. Because we can perform it in very, very different ways, but we need to agree, do we play jazzy? Do we play classical? Do we play folk? We need to talk about that. And if we miss doing that, how can we expect an aligned outcome to that? And I found through that epiphany that that's one of the core jobs that we have to do as leaders, because with this alignment, now we can feel comfortable that delegating a lot of the decision and delegating the performance itself means the playing of the instruments with the understanding of the alignment will create that we play music together. And also in business, we need to ask ourselves, if I use the musical term, what is the music that we play? Who is in the house tonight? Who's in the audience? Do we serve a classical music audience tonight? Do we serve another audience? So these are all things that once that leadership work is done, it creates a freedom of action that allows the individual performers to not only perform what they are good at, whether they play violin, whether they play bass, flute, clarinet, whether they are in sales, production, R&D. So if you use the sections of an orchestra to the different functions, that we are sure we're playing the same music and we know who our customer is, who we serve and what for, and what the generated outcome it is that we're supposed to deliver to our customers. So these are those analogies, and the freedom of action to me comes with alignment on values, vision, mission, the strategy, the plan, to then enable, empower, encourage, and enhance all the different performance. And by the way, make sure that we have the right people at the right place so that they can really perform in their specialty. And that applies in an orchestra or in a chorus, and it applies in business.
And let's talk about that, because putting the team together is mission. You got to have the right team.
Yep.
And then to align the right team with the right skills, talents, and abilities to the vision. But you first really need to start with do we have the right team?
Who's on the bus?
And do we need to
Who's on the orchestra?
Do we need to go make some adjustments? Do we need to do some training to develop their possibilities and their future state? Or do we need to go based on what we need to accomplish this year and go hire the right people? So how does that give us a little bit more of your thought around that, building the right team first?
Well, I'll use the orchestra analogy and the audition process in terms of how do we as an organization make sure that we have the highest quality ensemble together on stage. In an orchestra, there is a pretty formal audition process. At the Colorado Symphony, for example, we just went through 2 audition processes in fall, one for the principal bassoon and one for the principal timpani. In both roles, we had 70, 80 candidates who came in to kind of audition and to perform behind screen to an audition committee. And there is only one decision-making criteria that they had to make the decision, is the sound of a musician that they did not know, male, female, old, young, maybe one of the orchestra, and. So performance is the deal. And by the way, it's a very brutal process. Which leads to a decision or sometimes a no hire if it was not compelling enough. But that's kind of how a musician earns a seat in a symphony orchestra like the Colorado Symphony. It is comparable to being drafted to an NFL team, to an NBA team. This is the top of the violin players, clarinet players, bass players who manage through a brutal audition process to be selected to be on the bus, to be selected to be in an orchestra. And again, that ensures artistic integrity. This ensures the highest performance level, like in football, like in basketball, like in baseball. We all know that from pro sports. I just realized how little this is known, that the exact same thing applies to earn a seat in a symphony orchestra. So it starts with that. And I think the same principles have and do apply in business too. We need to make sure whoever we put into the respective seats brings the hard skill and brings so many of the soft skills in terms of listening, in terms of collaborating with others, which is another inspiring factor from the arts there. So it starts with the right people in the right place. And then that alignment about what we want to get accomplished, who we serve, what's the deliverable, that every individual has to contribute to the music, but what's the overall music that we play together? Do customers value that? And by the way, pay us for that? Is the same principle. And that right people at the right place with that alignment indeed generates that freedom of action where we allow individual performers to perform to their best. And by the way, do not do that just individually, but as an ensemble together, not playing notes, but playing music together.
The other major takeaway I had from being on stage was about the shared accountability and the measurement of engagement. So what I mean by that is, as an organization, when you think about your team, when you show up on stage to perform to an audience of how many people fit in Boccia Hall?
2,700.
So you show up to perform for 2,700 patrons and partners and sponsors. Your engagement and the expectation is that it's one of the best experiences they'll ever have in the rest of their life. Like every time you show up as a patron, you expect to be wowed, right? And do our team show up every day with that same expectation? Do we have that shared accountability as a team every day to show up and perform at the highest level possible? That was one analogy, Daniel, that I felt from my own experience. The other one was around engagement. So you can't sit on stage with a group of top performers in the world who are selected to be on stage for this moment and be unengaged, right? If you miss a note, if you're not showing up when your voice is supposed to be heard through your musical talents and your instrument, like lack of engagement can't exist here, right? Or if it does exist, it's going to show up on with a magnifying glass. Like it's going to be, the spotlight's going to be on you for missing when you came in, right? And that was the other piece, that like engagement can't hide for musicians, and you have to be fully engaged. And I'm sure there's moments where there are musicians who just are having an off day, right? But their off day is amplified.
Yep.
So those were two analogies that I thought of through my own experience of engagement and alignment is mission critical. And then how do we relate that back, right? How do we take that into the workplace? And how do we, as leaders, as unconventional leaders, how do we unpack that for our teams and the people who are around us? And Daniel, I don't know from your own personal lessons learned through this leadership experience, you're certainly one of the leaders who I've admired for the last decade plus. How have you done that? How have you ensured accountability, alignment, and engagement show up at the top of your at the top of the chart every day with your teams?
Well, I think as a leader, it starts very much about your own passion for what you do. I was in the packaging industry for 20 years-ish. I was in specialty chemistry. I fell in love with classical music. I never had any lack of passion for packaging or specialty chemistry. and the purpose that it serves. And I think as I am a purpose-driven person, I was seeking for purpose in packaging specialty chemistry myself. And I realized that it is part of my job by deciding who is on the bus, can those team members align around that same purpose so that we are really intrinsically driven by that, because it shows in our leadership work. It shows whether we can be passionate about what we do, whether it's packaging, specialty chemistry, and whatever that is. And if there is a lack of passion for that, we're probably not as effective as we have to be as leaders. And these are choices to be made. So I think it starts there in a certain way, and beyond the hard alignment on values and vision and mission and strategy and budget and so on. I think there is this very, very strong connection that we need to create in terms of, are we aligned on a passion in here? So I think that is a very strong part. And again, from my personal experience, like I said, I had never a lack of passion for packaging and specialty chemistry. I had no idea how different of a level of that passion connection it would be to run a symphony business. And sorry that I call it a business, because it's not, and it is. It's not because it's an arts form. It is because we have to earn revenues and pay bills, and it's about strategy and execution and. And it's interesting for me personally, as you ask me, how this passion for this art form, for music, and what it serves in a community, what it does to people, the joy you have referred to, how much this fires me up as a leader, and being excited about what we do, and look for leaders who follow that passion that we share as a passion to even increase our impact out there. So I think passion and that connection that we feel beyond all the rational stuff. Mike, you know me, I'm a very rational guy. But anyway, that passion, that fire that we have, I think is one of those key aspects as leaders.
Have you ever experienced a passionless orchestra or symphony or chorus? Like, because you have traveled the world and you have sat in rooms with musical gifted talents all over the world. Have you ever personally felt like, if you were to evaluate a team, have you ever personally felt like, I can just feel there's something missing here, versus, wow, this one absolute blew me away and stood the hair up on my neck because of the emotional experience?
Absolutely. And by the way, I mean, the answer cannot be no. It has to be yes, because especially in a business, in an art form like that is performed 100% by humans, it is a human performance with all its ups and downs. We all have bad days. As leaders, we do too. And still in those bad days, we need to be aware of our verbal communication, of the non-verbal communication, because we cannot not communicate. We need to be disciplined in a way, because if we let that carry too much, it will impact our entire environment. And I will answer your question a little bit differently, but I think it will answer it. Through my job now, leading a symphony business and usually being in the house when thousands of our customers are in the house, I have the big privilege to experience the same performance multiple times. Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday morning. And the most fascinating, magical thing to me, which I try to understand and comprehend, and I don't yet, is how different every performance can be. Same 80 musicians, same conductor, same music, though every performance is incredibly different. And I start to ask musicians, conductors, what is it that drives this difference? And you can explain it by different energy. Not everyone is in the same mood. It always also comes to the fact how big of a factor the audience is, and what the musicians and the conductor sense as an energy in the house, which can be inspiring and encouraging, but which also can have a little bit of the opposite effect. And I remember a few performance weekends where those performances could not have been any different, although all the ingredients except for the audiences were all exactly the same. It's magic and it's fascinating. And I think it has to do with energy, with mood, with mindset, and many other things. And I think that's the magic of live performance. And it's the magic of human performance.
So one of the things that tie into that, I was just listening to a podcast, and the guest of that podcast said, do me a favor, go and look up the Bach cello suites and Pablo Casal's performances, and then also listen to, find the performances of Johann Sebastian Bach and Pablo Casals. And what an exercise. Then I also, I clicked into Spotify and hit find like, and then it also was playing Yo-Yo Ma, which personally I could feel the emotional difference and the depiction and the design of the actual performances themselves. And I spent 3 days listening to their performances, which also changed what I was listening to on the radio versus a podcast versus prepping for a podcast versus just, finding music to mindlessly have on in the background. So, and there's lots of studies around the power of classical music. I'm a big jazz fan. I have been my whole life. But what an exercise. And Daniel, I'm sure your playlist includes many different performances from many different conductors and musicians from around the world. But what have you taken from also your own leadership from listening to classical music, listening to jazz music beyond, today's pop culture?
Yeah. Well, probably one of the most humbling things as an epiphany indeed, in a way that the arts helped me to increase my awareness as a leader, watching the conductor. But at the same time, it made me even so much more humble because I have only so little time and so little direct impact indeed. Because my performance, orchestrating a business, now it's a symphony business, depends on the accumulation of a lot of individual performances of humans with good days, bad days, as well as orchestrating that as a team where, if I go back to what I've just shared before, same music, same musicians, same conductor, though the performance can be so significantly different. Up to the point that I remember that Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony performance, where Saturday something happened and no one could explain why it happened, but it happened and it was amazing. So it makes incredibly humble at times, especially if the performance depends 100% of humans and not machines you switch on and off and pretty know what you can expect or not. It is so different. We're in a human business. And that can be incredibly rewarding. And let's face it, as leaders, it can be frustrating. You do everything right, you say everything right, and still it does not do what it does. And there are so many factors that are completely outside of our control. And that's the magic and the fascination, I think, being in a human business. It's the most difficult, the most complex, the most rewarding, and sometimes the most frustrating part. Because we have so little control, other than we can inspire, we can show passion, we can align, and still we depend on so many others, whether it's going to be a great performance or not. And by the way, the audience plays a role too. And if you bring this to business, the customers, I think, play an incredible role. If they don't challenge us enough as a supplier, for example, can they expect stellar performance? Maybe not. Maybe it's just going to be mediocre because we did not get challenged. So there is a role of the customers as well, like it's the role of the audience to contribute to a performance outcome as well.
Yeah. Back to the humbling experience, when you think about your leadership providing some level of energy to those experts in their craft, it has to be a humbling experience because I assume it's all about painting vision, providing energy, letting them know how incredibly valued and an important asset that they are, and then also letting them know the environment you're trying to create for them and how much you're leaning in to engaging the patrons to get the right audience, which is a big part of the kind of the corporate team's responsibility as well, to get the right audience, to be there to hear the beautiful notes and music that's played. How humbling is it to kind of evaluate your role in all of that? Because you're learning this craft. You're learning how to be you're not a lifelong CEO of symphonies. This is fairly new to you. So what are you learning personally and going through during this time to be the expert?
Well, I mean, first of all, there are incredibly lot transferable skills, right? From a for-profit business to running a symphony business, especially from a leadership perspective. At the same time, the content of the business is incredibly different than specialty chemistry and packaging, though we produce a product. The product is produced live on stage by 80 musicians and a conductor, and at times plus 120 chorus singers. It is incredibly humbling because, like I said, I come from manufacturing. You switch on machines and you switch them off, and you pretty much can predict what comes out at the end of the line as a product. Very, very different if the product is 100% produced by people. And that's humbling to the point how different the performance can be, although it's the same music, the same musicians, the same conductors. So that's a very humbling experience. I observe every weekend when we perform the same music 3 times, 3 days in a row. And I think the other part about drafting a vision, the biggest change, for example, to make it as tangible as I can, that I try to drive in here at the Colorado Symphony is that we have world-class artistic performance. At the same time, I've realized, because probably I have never been in a privileged role, that all of my customers came to my place. That means in my for-profit roles, I had to travel the world to see my customers. This is a first time for me where it is the other way around, where our customers come to our house. And I feel this is an incredible responsibility and privilege. They take the drive, the traffic jam, the snow, the parking garage, walking over to come to our place, which made me realize is we have a responsibility of a host. And beyond us providing them world-class music, I want to provide them an experience of belonging, a safe place, a house where we can come together. While we might disagree on a lot of things, maybe most of the things, but we can come together as humans to share a joint experience and touch our hearts and souls. And by the way, afterwards, be able to talk to the musicians. So this tangible example, Mike, is a very tangible change that I drive, where I want to evolve from being transactional, of welcoming people, play music to them, and then they leave, to kind of welcome them in our house, give them a feeling of belonging, provide them world-class musical experience for joy, for grief, for both, for being present, and afterwards create community so that we can talk about it, that they can talk to the musicians. And that's a very, very tangible change. And to me, it's a very humbling experience, because this is like a change from left to right. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of conversation. It takes some early adopters of my leadership team who understands what that vision is, but also who understand how that translates into a marketing function, sales function, patron services function, and so on and so on. How that translates in terms of how do we motivate the musicians after a taxing performance of 1.5 hours to show up in the front of the house for a conversation with someone. So the vision is easily explained, but it is so humbling in terms of how it first has to resonate internally with the leadership to understand, but also then to translate that into specific action and changes to deliver on the change. Incredibly humbling and rewarding. And by the way, incredibly inspiring to see what impact that they can make to the audience members that we have in the house.
What has been your greatest surprise or frustration in that change? Because it's a change for these musicians to be asked to do that. So how did you work and present this to them? And what's been both surprising and, is there anything still frustrating that you're trying to navigate and work through?
I would not call it frustrations, because I've experienced over 20 years being in business and leadership roles and change management, that change is hard.
Time. Yeah.
It takes time. So I would not call it a frustration. It's more that I see that as a responsibility and a humbling experience that we have to talk about why do we change, right? We need to get specific about what that change means and how we perform differently in that change. And I mean, in that example that I've made, the change is maybe not so much for our musicians because their performance world on stage doesn't really change. What is indeed a change that we encourage is that they leave the building through the front of the house and not through the stage door. Why? Because in the front of the house, after the performance, are the people whose souls and hearts they have just touched through their art. And those people have an incredible desire to talk to those people, means the musicians who just did that to them. They don't even have to talk a lot. The people from the audience will do the talk because they just got activated. Yeah. The change is so much more, I would say, on the administration side to make people realize is that this is prime time of us being present in the house when our customers are there to engage, to talk, to guide, to build relationships, to encourage to come back again, to encourage to come more often. This is like sales time. Or from a fundraising perspective, the chance to talk personally to the donors that are in the house and understand their reasoning why it is important to them not only to show up for a concert, but also why they give. And to deepen the understanding what we do with the money that they give to us and the impact that we generate there. And that's a large change for this organization specifically, where I found our relationship building was more transactional, not personal. And I'm really driving that change. And by the way, I better lead by example. If I do not show up at least 2 of the 3 performances every weekend, and most of the time I show up at 3 of them, if I don't lead by example, how can I expect anyone else to do that? So I need to lead by example by doing it. I need to lead by example by showing what I mean with that. And it takes time, Mike, like you said. Some people adopt earlier, some a little later. Some need a little bit more work to explain why this is important, what their role is in the front of the house. And some might choose to not change. And there we need to have a change conversation about, now, do you want to change and probably employ your skill set elsewhere? Or how can I help you to get more comfortable in that change and effectively be part of the change in here? And again, change is hard. I like the idea of not being frustrated, but this is our job. And by the way, once I get frustrated, I've probably failed as a leader. So I better lead well in a way that we don't get to frustration points, actually on all different sides.
One of the most encouraging, it was one of these like encouraging, unexpected moments when we were on stage with musicians, and the musicians were technically excused. They were shared, thank you all so much for being here. We gave multiple standing ovations. And then some of them just sat back down and said, I want to stay for the debrief. I've never been this close to basically what they were describing. I've never sat this close to my customers. I've never been able to sit and hear what we actually did to you all and why everybody shows up every week. And like it was or every performance. I remember particular, I want to say it was a oboist. Did I say that right? Yeah. I want to say there was someone who was like, I've been a musician for 37 years and I've never sat directly next to a customer and had this conversation. So I'm sure and I remember also kind of the after party where, there were musicians who were just excited to meet us and, what do you love most about music? What brought you here? Where did you come from? What's your background? Like they were equally as interested. And I think that shows just a beautiful engagement of a relationship.
And Mike, it's a two-way street. So what I've just explained about keeping the front of the house open for people in the audience to be able to engage with the musicians who just touched their souls, it's the other way around. I like the idea it's energizing for our musicians as well, and to hear feedback firsthand from the people who just listened to their performance. We just took the Colorado Symphony to a tour to New York a few weeks ago to perform at Radio City Music Hall, twice with Gregory Alan Isakov, 2 sold-out nights, and then the 3rd performance at Carnegie with Itzhak Perlman. And it was very intentional of us, not only to say, hey, we go to tour to New York, but to really activate our community and to get our community to participate in this tour in a send-off concert and to kind of show that support to the musicians. So again, that's a two-way street where through the front of the house, through that kind of send-off concert engagement, we wanted our musicians to get energized by our community and hear firsthand, not just through applause at the end of the performance, but hear firsthand from so many people why they are proud of them to perform at Carnegie, to perform at New York, why the arts matter to them. So again, it's a very, very important two-way street, which is a tool I play intentionally from a leadership perspective that I want our musicians, I need our musicians to get firsthand input from the audience. It's motivating.
It's so good. Daniel, I want to ask you the question we love to ask our guests of what does unconventional leadership mean to you?
To me, it means that, I've learned my craft. I've learned leadership. I've done it through my college time. I've done it through an executive MBA program, leadership trainings, books. And I have to admit, the most powerful leadership lessons that I've learned did come completely differently. They came from the Rubens House in Antwerp, from a painter. They come from observing a conductor. So I would say the most unconventional thing I can think of is to open the mind and seek inspiration from completely different places where you might not expect to learn what you're looking for, and to open that mind that way. And once I've realized that I became the leader I am mainly thanks through non-management books and classes, but through inspirations, through people, through listening, through learning from people, from conductors. That to me was a game changer. And I so much enjoy making and planning time to get inspired from things that are outside my comfort zone, that are outside my job, my role. And that has been incredibly inspiring and I think made me a much better leader. And by the way, I'm still pretty imperfect. And I want to learn. So it comes with the desire to learn and to be open and receptive to inspiration from outside.
Thank you so much for sharing, Daniel. I know that one of the things about leadership as we wrap up this conversation, the impact we have on people, the why we do what we do, the joy we bring to the room, the energy we bring to our people, and the space that we create for them is part of our responsibility as leaders. And if you've heard anything in this episode, for those of you listening and watching, I hope you reflect on this, that you have the opportunity to create the room, create the space, and let amazing people do what they're gifted at. But it's your responsibility to create that space and bring joy into their, if you bring joy into the lives of your team, they will show up better than they've ever been able to show up.
Absolutely. And one of those powerful components that I would like to add to what you've just said, Mike, is I think what we provide is not only a safe place, is not only a safe house, is not only an incredible music experience, but we kind of provide or even force presence. You don't talk to anyone. You should have switched off your phone, and you are immersing into an audio experience while visually you can observe. You see a leader on stage leading 80, 100, 200 musicians, how they collaborate. And maybe you get completely immersed into music and it's touching you and switch your brain off. Good for you. And that happens at times. And sometimes it does not. And it inspires the machine up here, the brain, to really work and think hard. And you come up with ideas that I can guarantee you would not have been coming up if you would not have given the time and the presence to be in the here and now to get inspired that way. And that's what we do through our art form for the souls, but also for the brains. And that's to me part of that unconventional leadership part that I can highly encourage, not selfishly because we would like to sell tickets. I mean, that's part of the business, but to really share those experiences and to inspire and unite humanity through those live symphonic performances.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Mike, for having me back. Actually, I've learned a lot. Thank you so much for your inspiring questions to make me think about stuff that I've not thought about it that way. So really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope I could inspire not only you inspired me, but many others who will listen to this podcast.
Excellent. And we will provide some links in the show notes for you to check out when you're going through your trips. If you're not from Colorado, as you visit, we would strongly encourage, we'll provide a link to check out what Daniel and his team at the Colorado Symphony are doing. We also want to encourage you to really lean into this episode and some of the other past episodes that Daniel and I have recorded that we will also provide. And we hope that this is just one more piece to inspire you to lead unconventionally, to think differently, to put yourself in different experiences where then you too can learn and find inspiration and motivation. I want to thank Big Up Studios for this partnership. I also want to thank Cincinnati Podcast Studio for all that you do to bring this creative genius to our audience, our growing audience, every single week. So thank you all, and we'll see you next week.